On the evening of February 16, 2022, a quiet Jacksonville Beach neighborhood became the scene of a brutal execution. 33-year-old Jared Bridegan, a respected Microsoft senior design manager, was making his usual drive after dropping off his twin children at the home of his ex-wife. His 2-year-old daughter sat in the backseat of his black Volkswagen Atlas, oblivious to the mortal danger that loomed ahead. Jared's route was familiar, he had taken it many times before. He was a man of routine, known for his dedication to his children and his work. Having divorced in 2015, he and his ex-wife, Shanna Gardner, shared custody of their 9-year-old twins. While the arrangement was tense, Bridegan made a point to honor it without complaint. His current wife, Kirsten, often noted his unwavering commitment to being present in his children's lives, regardless of personal inconvenience. That evening, however, routine gave way to chaos. Somewhere between Jacksonville Drive and Sanctuary Boulevard, Jared encountered an obstruction, a single tire placed suspiciously in the middle of the road. It wasn't shredded or exploded, just sitting there, as if dropped from the sky. Unaware that he was walking into a trap, Jared pulled over and stepped out to move the tire. He left the driver's side door open, and his hazard lights blinked in the dusk. Then came the gunfire. In the seconds that followed, Jared was shot multiple times at close range. The bullets tore through his torso and arms, some striking him fatally while others pierced the vehicle's frame. One round narrowly missed his daughter in the backseat. She remained unharmed, physically, at least, but frozen in her car seat, strapped inches away from the bullets that killed her father. At 8 p.m., a call came into the Jacksonville Beach Police Department. Shots fired, a man down. Officers arrived to find Jared's lifeless body lying on the road beside his car. His 2-year-old daughter, still in her seat, had witnessed everything. She was later described as being in a state of shock, unable to speak when first responders lifted her from the blood-stained SUV. The scene was both calculated and cruel. A seemingly random tire had lured a father to his death. Investigators immediately suspected premeditation. There was no sign of robbery, no car theft, nothing but a cold-blooded murder and a terrified toddler left behind. News of Jared Bridegan's murder spread rapidly through Florida and beyond. To his family and colleagues, it made no sense. Jared was not involved in criminal activity, had no known enemies, and led a life devoted to family and technology. Yet the nature of the ambush, its planning, its precision, told a different story. This was not a crime of impulse. This was orchestrated. Detectives from the Jacksonville Beach Police Department, along with the state attorney's office, launched an intensive investigation. Early on, they held back most of their findings. They didn't name suspects or reveal evidence. But behind closed doors, they were building a case, slowly unraveling the web behind the murder of a devoted father and husband. Speculation began to swirl around the custody battle between Jared and his ex-wife, Shanna Gardner. Their divorce had been far from amicable, marred by disagreements over parenting, communication, and visitation rights. Gardner had since remarried Mario Fernandez Saldana, a man with no visible connection to Jared but who, as it would later emerge, played a central role in the developing investigation. While Jared's widow, Jared Bridegan, publicly demanded justice and supported law enforcement's efforts, Gardner remained largely silent. After the murder, she relocated from Florida to West Richland, Washington, with her children, raising eyebrows about her intentions and timing. Still, in early 2022, there was no proof linking her or anyone else to the crime. Then came the breakthrough. Investigators discovered surveillance footage that revealed a suspicious vehicle in the area at the time of the murder, a blue Ford F-150. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to dig deeper. They traced the truck to a man named Henry Tenon, a 61-year-old with a modest background and a growing list of red flags. He had a criminal history and, crucially, had once rented a property owned by Mario Fernandez Saldana. This connection was no coincidence. Detectives scrutinized Tenon's phone records, revealing that he had been in the vicinity of Jacksonville Beach on the night of the murder. When confronted, Tenon denied involvement and claimed a friend had borrowed his truck that night. But his story began to unravel when investigators discovered a series of unusual bank transactions in the months following the killing. Tenon had deposited 3 checks into his account, $2,000, $3,000, and $5,000, staggered and suspicious. All of them bore the signature of a known associate of Fernandez Saldana. It wasn't just a random killing anymore. The money trail suggested a murder for hire. In January 2023, nearly a year after Jared's murder, Henry Tenon was arrested. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, second-degree murder with a weapon, and being an accessory after the fact to a capital felony. But this arrest wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. In exchange for a plea deal, Tenon agreed to speak. The man who pulled the trigger was finally talking. The murder of Jared Bridegan had all the hallmarks of a cold, calculated hit. From the planted tire to the precision of the gunshots, authorities quickly concluded this was no random act of violence. Behind the scenes, investigators combed through surveillance footage, digital footprints, and bank records, quietly piecing together a picture of betrayal, manipulation, and conspiracy. It didn't take long for a particular vehicle to pique their interest. A blue Ford F-150 appeared on local surveillance around the time of the murder. That truck would become central to the unraveling of the plot. While sifting through the evidence, law enforcement zeroed in on a man named Henry Tenon. 61 years old at the time, Tenon was a known figure to law enforcement due to a checkered past. But what truly caught investigators' attention was that Tenon had previously lived in a property owned by Mario Fernandez Saldana, the new husband of Jared's ex-wife, Shanna Gardner. The pieces started to fall into place. Tenon owned a vehicle matching the blue Ford F-150 caught on camera the night of the killing. When investigators examined Tenon's cell phone data, they confirmed it placed him in Jacksonville Beach precisely when the murder occurred. Tenon claimed a friend had borrowed his truck that night, but investigators weren't convinced. Especially not after they discovered something even more damning. 3 checks, totaling $10,000, had been deposited into Tenon's bank account shortly after the murder. These weren't small sums to ignore. One check for $2,000 was cashed on March 28, another for $3,000 followed, and then a final one for $5,000 on April 4. All 3 were signed by Mario Fernandez Saldana. Investigators now believed they were looking at a carefully orchestrated murder-for-hire scheme. Further probing into Tenon's phone records revealed a staggering number of communications between him and Saldana. In the month of the murder alone, they exchanged 35 phone calls. The following month, another 30. Their contact continued through the spring, suggesting an ongoing relationship that likely involved coordination and secrecy. The conversations weren't casual, they were strategic. In January 2023, nearly a year after the shooting, authorities arrested Tenon and charged him with second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory after the fact to a capital felony. But the most critical breakthrough came when Tenon made a pivotal decision. He accepted a plea deal. In exchange for a 15-year sentence, Tenon pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In doing so, he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors and testify about his role and the people who had ordered the killing. In his confession, Tenon finally admitted it. He was the triggerman. He pulled the weapon. He fired the bullets that ended Jared Bridegan's life. But he hadn't done it alone. With Tenon now cooperating, the investigation shifted focus to the man believed to be the middleman, Mario Fernandez Saldana. On March 16, 2023, Saldana was arrested in Orange County, Florida. A grand jury indicted him on multiple charges, including first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit a capital felony, and child abuse. The last charge stemmed from the fact that Jared's 2-year-old daughter had been present during the ambush, a horrifying reality that only underscored the recklessness and cruelty of the crime. As news of Saldana's arrest broke, the public began asking a darker question: could Jared's ex-wife, Shanna Gardner, have played a role? To some, the idea was inconceivable. But to those closest to Jared, it wasn't a stretch. The divorce between Jared and Shanna had been anything but smooth. Custody battles raged on for years. Accusations flew in both directions. Jared, known for being a calm and doting father, had long fought for more time with his children. Shanna, now remarried to Saldana, had relocated to West Richland, Washington, following the murder, raising suspicions that she was distancing herself from the crime scene. Investigators, armed with Tenon's testimony and newly uncovered evidence, kept digging. By August 2023, their patience paid off. Shanna Gardner was arrested and charged in connection with Jared's murder. A grand jury indicted her on the same charges her husband faced: first-degree murder, conspiracy, solicitation to commit a capital felony, and child abuse. For many, it was the final, shocking confirmation of a suspected betrayal that had lingered just beneath the surface. Gardner and Saldana both entered not guilty pleas. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to their involvement, they stood firm in denying any part in the crime. Prosecutors, unconvinced by their denials, announced they would pursue the death penalty if convicted. The arrests of Gardner and Saldana marked a chilling turn in the case. Not only was Jared Bridegan ambushed and killed in front of his daughter, but the people suspected of orchestrating it were part of his former family circle. The motive seemed rooted in an ongoing power struggle over custody, resentment, and revenge. As the legal proceedings began to take shape, Kirsten Bridegan, Jared's widow, spoke publicly about her loss. She painted a picture of a loving husband and father whose life was brutally ended by people he once trusted. She became a voice for justice, not just for her husband, but for the children left behind. The case garnered national attention, not just because of the shocking nature of the murder, but due to the complexity of the plot and the characters involved. A man gunned down on a quiet road, a staged obstacle used as bait, a killer paid through signed checks, and an ex-wife now indicted for masterminding it all. It had the chilling components of a true crime saga. Behind the headlines, though, remained a family torn apart. While Tenon awaited sentencing, the cases against Gardner and Saldana moved through the pretrial stages. Prosecutors prepared their capital case, and the defense teams began strategizing. The weight of the evidence, and Tenon's sworn cooperation, cast a long shadow over the accused. But one thing was clear: this was not over. The full truth, and the final reckoning, would be decided in a courtroom. The pieces were coming together, but not in the way anyone had expected. Jared Bridegan's murder had seemed, at first glance, like a carefully calculated execution. But as investigators combed through financial records, communication logs, and personal histories, it became clear that this was more than a hit. It was a betrayal deeply rooted in resentment, vengeance, and a tangled family dynamic that had grown poisonous long before the fatal shots were fired. On August 17, 2023, nearly 18 months after Jared was ambushed in front of his child, his ex-wife, Shanna Gardner, was arrested in Washington state. Her name had floated beneath the surface of the investigation from the beginning. She had denied any involvement publicly, brushing off allegations, even as questions piled up. But law enforcement had been patient. They had traced the digital fingerprints. They had listened to the voices behind encrypted apps and subpoenaed conversations that revealed more than just bitterness. They pointed to intent. The indictment was damning. Gardner was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, and child abuse. The last charge, though less widely discussed, was perhaps the most chilling. It was directly tied to the trauma suffered by her own daughter, left alone, blood-soaked and confused, after witnessing her father gunned down beside her. This was no longer a crime story defined by a single suspect. Gardner's new husband, Mario Fernandez Saldana, had already been charged in connection with hiring Henry Tenon, the admitted gunman. But prosecutors believed Gardner was the driving force behind it all. She had motive. She had access. And she had influence over the man she lived with, enough, they claimed, to steer him into arranging a murder-for-hire plot against her ex-husband. Tenon's confession confirmed what detectives had suspected for months: the ambush was planned. The tire in the road was placed to stop Jared. Tenon waited in the shadows. The moment Jared stepped out of his vehicle to move the obstruction, just feet from his daughter, he was shot multiple times, execution style. There was no struggle, no warning, no chance of survival. What had triggered such violence? The answer pointed back to the custody dispute, a toxic, drawn-out battle over the twins Jared had fathered with Gardner. Court records showed years of legal sparring, with Jared fighting for more time with his children and Gardner allegedly attempting to curtail that access. Their divorce, finalized in 2015, had never truly ended the conflict. Now, prosecutors allege, Gardner sought to end it permanently. The arrest drew national attention, not just because of the horror of the crime, but because of the facade that had shielded its prime suspect for so long. Gardner came from wealth and influence, the daughter of the founders of Stampin' Up, a successful crafting company based in Utah. Her move to Washington after Jared's death had been seen as an escape, but investigators viewed it as evasion. Gardner pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her attorneys dismissed the prosecution's claims as circumstantial and accused the state of targeting her unfairly due to public pressure. But the evidence was stacking up. Phone records showed contact between Gardner, Fernandez, and Tenon. Financial links between Fernandez and Tenon hinted at payment. And Tenon's own words, given in a plea deal, described a plan that stretched back weeks before the murder. Then there was the surveillance. Fernandez had allegedly tracked Jared's routine. Investigators discovered that the tire used in the ambush was planted along a route Jared often took after dropping off the twins at Gardner's house. Prosecutors claimed it was not just premeditated, but strategically timed for maximum impact. Adding further weight to the state's case, the Florida State Attorney's Office announced its intention to pursue the death penalty against both Gardner and Fernandez. The justification cited aggravating factors: a murder committed for financial gain, in a cold and calculated manner, with a child present. Meanwhile, Jared's widow, Jared Bridegan, remained a force in the public eye. Her pain never eclipsed her resolve. In the months following her husband's murder, she launched a campaign for justice that refused to let the case go cold. She attended every court date, stood before the press, and continued to raise their young daughter, who had survived the most terrifying night of her life. Kirsten's advocacy went beyond grief. She pushed for legislative change, working with lawmakers to pass Jared's Law, which would protect children from being used as pawns in dangerous custody disputes. She also fought for transparency in criminal proceedings, demanding accountability in cases where domestic conflicts escalate into deadly violence. As 2025 approached, all three accused, Tenon, Fernandez, and Gardner, remained behind bars. Tenon, having accepted a plea deal, awaited sentencing, while Fernandez and Gardner were preparing for trials that promised to be lengthy, high-profile, and emotionally explosive. What remains undeniable is the tragedy left in the wake of one man's violent death. Jared Bridegan, remembered as a loving father and a devoted husband, had been silenced in an ambush. But the voices of those who loved him grew louder in his absence. Each revelation about the plot to kill him stripped away another layer of pretense, exposing the rock beneath. And in the end, that is what justice seeks, not just retribution, but truth. Not just punishment, but the full, unvarnished story of how a bitter divide turned deadly. Jared's story now stands as a warning, a wound, and, hopefully, a reckoning. Thank you for listening to Crime Echoes with Lewis. For more content like this, please like this video and subscribe to my channel.